Okay, so our center and FSI are really honored to host Mongolian speaker Zandanshatar. So, he is known to many of us as Zendan. And I met him, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago. So when he was spending as a visiting fellow at CDDRL. So Mr. Zandanshatar is chairman of the state Great Hural in Mongolia. He serves as a foreign minister for Mongolia for many years, and also general secretary of the Mongolian People's Party and deputy minister of agriculture. In his early career, he held roles of increasing responsibility in Mongolia's banking sector. So as I mentioned, I met him many years ago here at Stanford, and then we stay in touch. And actually, I went to Mongolia twice in the past, on his invitation, and we had a great time in Mongolia. And since then, we kept staying in touch, and then collaboration and relationship established at Stanford has been, very deep and also long-standing. So he worked with many of us at Stanford, Larry Diamond and Jim Fishkin. I think one great example is working with Jim Fishkin at his Center for Deliberative Democracy, and I believe where Zendan remains a senior advisor. And I think his work really impacts Mongolian political reform, and I hope he'll share in his remarks. That really underscored the potential for academic exchange and policy research to improve governance and spark civic participation. Based on his study of democracy and public opinion at Stanford, Mr. Zandanshatar and his colleague introduced and implemented deliberative polling at the city level in 2015. Its success led to Mongolia's first national deliberative poll 2 years later in 2017, which gave citizens from all walks of life an opportunity to provide input into policy experts and political leaders on proposed constitutional amendments. So today's event will include an address from Mr. Zandanshatar on the challenges for democracies in Asia and the democratic and political development Mongolia given its geostrategic situation. So after his remarks, we will have Ms. Bulgantuya Khurelbaatar. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Ms. Bulgantuya is a member of the Parliament of Mongolian and also deputy chairman of Mongolian People's Party caucus of the parliament. She serves in the Budget Standing Committee, Economic Standing Committee, and Security and Foreign Policy Standing Committee, and also chairs the Subcommittee on Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know how you can do all this work, serving in several committees. After achieving her high school in Australia, she obtained a BA in economics from Hural University of Science and Technology in China, and master's degree in international and development economics from Yale University. She has worked internationally as consultant on the World Bank project in East Timor and Palestine on improving public financial management. So once again, I'd like to welcome you back, Zendan, to our campus, and also I really welcome a whole delegation from Mongolia. It's really my honor and pleasure to host this event. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Zandanshatar.
Firstly, I would like to thank Professor Jiwukshin, APARC, and CDDRL for organizing this event during this difficult time of the pandemic. And taking this opportunity, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Professor Larry Diamond, James Fishkin, and Jiwukshin for your continued support in consolidating Mongolia's democracy, because we did together we could accomplish a very good constitutional reform in Mongolia to strengthen Mongolia's democratic institutions. It has been more than 2 years since the beginning of the global outbreak of the pandemics, during which the national governments have been implementing various strategies and policies to face and overcome the double-edged hardships of the pandemics, one being public health security, another economic impact of the restrictive measures. Due to highly contagious and mutative nature of the disease, the governments have taken various measures of the restrictions, from complete lockdown to the milder restrictions of social distancing. Although these emergency measures of generally restrictive natures are being implemented at the direct expense of democratic principles and human rights, such as free movement, employment, access to information, freedom of assembly, worships, free and open criticism to the government, there are still possibilities and even new avenues to better realize and uphold democratic values and human rights within the restricted period. But we should also cannot forget that even before the pandemic, democracies were still struggling with a multitude of challenges. And for instance, Professor Larry Diamond, I was supporting Professor Larry Diamond's idea of the democratic depression during this period of since 2010 or 5. So I was arguing in Mongolia that democracy is in decline. The global state of democracy in 2019, the International Ideas flagship report, highlights that the 6 of these pre-pandemic global challenges. One is crisis of representation of political parties and the rise of populism. Second, pattern and conditions of democratic backsliding. 3, empowerment of civil society in a shrinking civic space. Or managing electoral processes and challenging environments. 5, corruption and role of money in politics. And 6, the impact of information communication technologies on democracy. In case of Mongolia, it was happening in all over the Asia and all over the world, I guess. In the case of Mongolia, consolidation of democracy in Mongolia faced decline and multiple challenges. According to the worldwide governance indicators, voice and accountability, rule of law, regulatory quality and political stability, absence of violence, Mongolia's indicators have been dropping past 2 decades since the data collection began. In the past 30 years, Mongolia experienced political instability, poor governance, weak oversight, unequal distribution of wealth, and imbalance of power mechanism, corruption, income inequality, and growing gap between rich and poor. It also faced challenges to localize good practices with over 1,000 legislations that were implemented and seen to be unsuitable for Mongolia's specific context. In this regard, there was an urge to deal with these challenges. There was Mongolian people's will, a demand of whole society to revisit the constitution. There were a few attempts in the past to revisit the constitution. The 1992 first democratic constitution of Mongolia was adopted through an inclusive and participatory process over a period of 15 months. However, first amendments made to the constitution in 2000 were adopted behind the closed doors without any meaningful public discussion. Other failed attempts to amend constitution in 2011, 2012, and 2015 were similarly neither open or non-inclusive. In view of this experience, it was important to have the participation of citizens and scholars and to seek to build consensus among political actors during the constitutional amendment process. With regards to the concept of deliberative democracy and deliberative polling process, method of public opinion gathering developed by the Professor James Fishkin was introduced to Mongolia. In May 2015, at the Conference of Constitutional Amendment and Deliberative Democracy, where all party leaders, scholars, and academia gathered, the concept was first discussed. And Larry Diamond and James Fishkin participated in this conference, and we shared our thoughts about the constitutional amendment and as well as deliberative democracy. Parliament of Mongolia, in its autumn session of 2016, adopted law on deliberative polling. It set forth that deliberative polling is now required by law before the parliament can proceed to consider amendments to few crucial constitutional provisions affecting parliament and presidency and the prime minister. So the amendment went through unprecedented participatory process, enhancing the legitimacy of the reforms, potentially establishing an emerging political convention. This was perhaps first ever case among modern nations that used this deliberative polling mechanism for the amendment of the constitution. The amendment involved engagement of the public, the main opposition parties, and the president of Mongolia too. The participatory process involved the experimental deliberative polling, which allowed randomly selected Mongolians or random samples of Mongolia from across the country to influence the agenda and outcome of the process. In other words, Mongolians gathered in one room, all the representative samples. Deliberative council, this was an extraordinary high rate of the participation. The deliberative council submitted the recommendations on constitutional amendment to the parliament, which established the working group in charge of drafting amendments, composed members of representing the ruling and opposition parties. The working group submitted draft amendments to the various state entities for their reviews, subsequently to the chairman of the parliament in May, and the result was published online in June 2017. I'm pleased to inform you that Mongolia had successfully amended its constitution on November 14, 2019, using deliberative polling in the process, which was perhaps first ever case among the modern nations, used this mechanism for amending its constitution. Deliberative poll was a critical part of the process of consultation and discourse that helped shaping the final amendments. Our view is that Mongolia's adoption of deliberative poll is a tool for effective constitutional amendment that can be modeled for other nations. Now, many other nations now are debating on the constitutional amendment, but in case of a referendum, we can look at the example of Brexit. In case of parliamentary approval, we can see Austrian or other European parliaments failures the constitutional amendment. So based on the opinions of Mongolians, we adopted constitutional amendment. That's why now we are following up the constitutional amendment and recently we approved law on the judiciary to create more independent and accountable judiciary system. It was people's will reflected by the deliberative polling. We adopted new law on government and parliament, which is a reflection of the people's will, Mongolians' will and demand. As a result of the constitutional amendment, helped by the James Fiscal, Larry Diamond, Jivukshin, we somehow, I think we stepped forward in consolidation of Mongolia's democracy. As per the international ideas, global state of democracy, and this is the analysis which the global state democracy report is based on. Mongolia can be recognized as one of the democratic frontrunners in the Asia and the Pacific region. So it is not my conclusion, it's international organizations and global state of democracy evaluated. Mongolia is one of the vibrant democracies in this region, which shows good examples to other authoritarian regimes in this region, I would say. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
So now I'd like to turn to Ms. Bulgantuya, and she'll make her remarks, and then we'll have some conversation with our people here. So please.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today with such esteemed academics. I have prepared a small presentation here. This year, we marked the 100th anniversary of 1920 first People's Revolution of Mongolia, which formed the second communist party, communist country in the world. And this year also, we marked the 30th anniversary of adopting democracy and market economy. At the same time, with the constitutional amendment and for strengthening democracy, it's very important for people to benefit from market economy and from democracy. This is where we seem to be lacking. Democracy is adopted by the Constitution. People are supportive of democracy, but at the same time, people want to see the benefits of democracy and also of the market economy. I just want to give you a brief introduction of where we are right now. So some of the macroeconomic indicators. So since the 1990s, the annual GDP rate has been fluctuating between contraction of about 10% and of about growth of 17%. As you can see from the 1990s, during the transition period, we had some fallbacks, but at the same time, it's still very, very volatile and very, very connected to the to political decisions and also to the mineral prices as well. In the last 30 years, we implemented about 6 IMF programs, rescue packages, and lasted almost about half of the 30 years as well. The next one, please. In terms of the GDP per capita, we have pretty much tripled since the 1990s. But at the same time, we still see there's very high poverty, inequality, which also stokes social problems, discontent towards those who are benefiting from the wealth distribution. Corruption is still high and very deep-rooted. Though Parliament and both government are taking initiatives to fight with corruption, we still see high problems, which also makes the inequality worse. As you can see, we're right here in the middle, the dotted line here. We are doing better than some of the countries, but we could do better, especially with the wealth distribution and GDP increase with the GDP per capita. I had another graph which I couldn't find for some reason. In the 1990s, at the start of the 1990s, pretty much GDP per capita, and also for the human development indexes, we were pretty much the same with China. And now they have the growth is much higher with China, and we have deteriorated even with some of the human development indexes. The next one, please. The mineral dependence of Mongolian economy is very, very high. This shows the mineral sector per GDP. In the 1990s, the green graph, and it was about 13%. Then about 2000, it came down to 11%. And now it's about 24%, now even rising to 30%. The mineral export is now about almost 90%. We have been talking about for the last 20, 30 years about diversifying the economy, even though non-mineral export has increased, the mining sector has been increasing exponentially as well, and it's about 90% now. Before in the 1990s, it was at about 52%, came down to about 42%. And it's also the mineral revenue is about 26%, almost about five-fold increase in terms of the revenues. FDI, the main also recipient of the FDI is still also it's the mineral sector as well, which was at about 44% previously. Yes.
Is that government revenue? Mineral revenue is total revenue?
Total revenue. Government revenue. Yeah. So in 2010, as you can see now, the mineral agricultural sector, its share in the GDP is we're seeing a decrease. We're seeing an increase in the mineral sector altogether, which is making the economy heavily reliant on the mineral commodity prices and fluctuations, also boom and bust cycles that come with it as well. So, and service sector have become the largest, accounting for about 40% of GDP, but also at the same time, we're showing the signs of the Dutch disease as well. The next one, please. And the volatile economy, it's now a source of great uncertainty for businesses, for investors, and also for policymakers. I hope you can see the numbers. So the economic growth is shown in the orange graph, the commodity price indexes in the green, and the overall the fiscal balance in the dark blue one. It shows that our fiscal balance and the commodity prices are very much interlinked, especially after the 2009 with the opening of the Rio Tinto big large copper mine. Now the economy is becoming even more reliant on the mineral prices. When the mineral prices went up during the 2010, 11, 12 year, we have seen also an exponential growth in the budget expenditure as well, riding on the boom cycle, and had a difficulty with cutting down during the bust cycle, which resulted, as you can see in the overall fiscal balance, poor fiscal balance, which also increased the debt as well. The next one, please. This would be the fiscal stability law has been introduced in 2010. Now the fiscal rules, we have explicit debt, budget balance, and also expenditure growth. But at the same time, we still see a huge uprise. Sorry, I should have put the graph name there. This is the foreign debt statistics according to the Mongolian Bank of Mongolia. We see a huge increase this is from 2012, when we first started to issue our national bond, and we see an increase of about almost fourfold, and debt to GDP ratio rose to about 78% in 2016. We bring it down to about 60% this year. So debt is still also has become one of the biggest issues. The next one, please. This is the competitive index according to about in 2019. So overall, we are ranking in about 102nd out of 141 countries. So in terms of, as you can see, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of product market, etc., we still have a long way to go and quite a lot of progresses to make for the public to benefit from democracy and from market economy, and also from the economic development of the country at large. The next one, please. So the economic development path can be divided pretty much into two. From the 1990s to 2000, this was our transition period. where we adopted neoliberal and liberal policies, privatization of state-owned enterprises, dissolution of Central Planning Commission, seen as during that time as the institution of the past. International and domestic trade is pretty much left to the market. Since 2000 to present, it has pretty much become liberal, social democratic, and Asian development policies all combined together. Whenever we get technical assistance from a certain country or a certain institution, we adopt policies that sometimes is incoherent to one another. So adopted various policies. We lowered taxes and social insurance to both investment and business. Taxes are personal income taxes at flat 10%. Corporate income tax is at 10% with a progressive rate of 25, which is still quite low. We have attempts has been made to reestablish the development policy planning institution. State-owned enterprises are now re-emerging as some of the biggest businesses, especially in the mining sector as well. So to date, various, especially policies, laws and reforms have been adopted with the assistance from various institutions, which needs to be aligned to development policies. Next one, please. The 6 main economic sub-periods can be seen from 1990 to 94. This involves a sharp decline in economic activity and living standards, and then returns to growth from 1995 to 2008, during which GDP per capita recovered to about pre-transition period in about 2003, and then debt crisis of 2001 was managed pretty fairly during that time. A sharp economic crisis in 2009. This was mainly triggered by external shocks, mostly in the financial sector, where we also implemented an IMF rescue plan package, reforming mostly the financial sector and the banking sector. And then rapid but unsustainable growth during 2010 to 2012, when we opened the doors to foreign investment, especially in the mining sector, with Rio Tinto and also the big TT coal mine. And this fueled a mining boom and then pro-cyclical fiscal expansion and private consumption growth at the same time. Then economic difficulties after the mineral exuberance from 2013 to 2016, during which we increased almost 10% increase in poverty within 2 years. So almost went the poverty rate almost increased to after the 1990s period. We have during this time, we have seen foreign direct investment shocks, a lack of fiscal policy adjustment, and then indicated rapid and unsustained debt accumulation as well. In 2012, we issued for the first time a national bond. Since then, we have issued a number of bonds, but at the same time, we have had difficulty managing debt crisis at the same time. Now, growth and recovery moderation from 2017 to 2019, during which we have also implemented IMF Extended Fund Facility Program and improved external market conditions. Also, very prudent fiscal policies have been adopted. Also, at the same time, in the banking sector, quite a lot of improvements have been made as well. So the sub-periods of the economy can be divided into such 6 periods. Next one, please. But the current situation after all these ups and downs is still pretty dire. People are still unable to receive benefits of the economy. The economy is still underdeveloped. Industrialization is pretty poor, very heavily reliant on the mining sector. In terms of politics, we have 36 political parties. Average duration of a government is about 1.8 years. Over the last 30 years, we have seen 17 governments changed. Corruption is still very high, 106 out of 180 countries. In terms of environment, ecological quality is 144th out of 180. World Economic Forum Inclusive Growth Index actually shows that we have, in terms of intergenerational indicators, we're doing poorly. This includes environment and also debt issue from one generation to the next. In terms of education, we're ranked first to number of university students per 100,000. For 3.3 million population, we have about 94 universities and almost about 150,000 college students, university students. We do have pretty good access to education. However, quality of education still needs significant improvement. And poverty is very high. It's about 28.4%. This is the last number from 2018. We may have seen an increase again during the COVID period as well. Incarceration rate is still very high, below probably US rate, but still quite high, about number 21st in the world. In terms of health issues for cancer, prevalence of cancer and heart attack, we're ranked pretty much number 1 in the world, and significant improvement is needed in the health reform, which has been, we have done quite a lot of reforms in the health sector from 2020. And for religion, we have about 27 religious, I think it's religious sects, So this is how pretty much the Mongolian economic policies look. In terms of the revenue side, it's very liberal, very supportive, low tax rates, open to investment, have become earlier than China. We have become a member of the World Trade Organization. Income and export taxes are quite low, but yet at the same time, on the budget expenditure side, previously I served as the Vice Minister of Finance. I tend to divert to the budget side. On the budget expenditure side, the public still expect quite a lot of support from the government, in terms of education, health, public services is all very, very much reliant on the budget. Over 90% of high school students, for instance, go to public school. Around 70% of kindergarten children go to public kindergarten, which is fully funded by the state. All the children, 1.1 million of the population, 1/3 of the population, they receive child money of about $34 per month throughout their childhood years up until they're about 18 years old now. So all this, it puts a huge restraint on the budget with a continuing budget deficit, at the same time increasing debt at the same as well. The constitutional amendment, the reason that we are bringing this up is because after 30 years of market economy and various policies that has been adopted, we realize that development plan and planning, it should be consistent and stable. It should not change from one political party to the next. It should not change from one government to the next with a duration of about 1.8 years, which has been the case in the past. And in accordance with the constitutional amendment, we are to implement legal reform, economic reform, and also social policy reform as well. Mr. Zandanshatar has talked about the legal reform side. On the economic reform and also the social policy reform, this autumn session, for instance, the reforms on the social welfare programs need to be amended by Parliament. Last spring session, we have adopted the new law on labor. However, the labor law, social insurance law usually tends to be very, social democratic. And the revenue side of the laws usually tends to be very liberal. And this is where the incohesiveness seems to be taking place. The next one, please. So from the economic development models, this is where Mr. Zandanshatar has initiated an economic, like a council amongst the parliamentarians, and also including well-known economists in Mongolia and international institutions like World Bank and IMF to sit down together to adopt Mongolia's economic development model. When we cannot copy and paste from various development models, out of the four models, the Anglo-Saxon model, the social democratic model, and the Asian model, and of course the Islamic models. We believe that what would fit probably Mongolia's socioeconomic condition the best is an Asian model, which is supportive of certain sectors in the economy with a strong government support. Also, at the same time, social welfare and protection is well supported from the government at the same time. Of course, which model to choose from is heavily dependent on social welfare and social protection needs. Having gone through the market economy of 30 years, people are still at dismay if the government cannot support public health, if government cannot support public education. So how much of a social protection people require, how much of a tax base and tax burden that they can have, how much of human capacity we have, and the development policy continuity and capable civil service, and also the political policy. U.S. is of course is a heavy supporter of Anglo-Saxon model with little government intervention as possible, market economy and individualism be the basis of it all. However, Mongolia is still people who are in their 60s now, in the 70s, have lived half of their life in the socialist area where public health and public schools and services have been provided from the state free of charge and to a pretty good quality. People still expect this from Mongolia as well. So we still need to consider the Mongolian social and cultural and also economic situations. So issues that need to be addressed in the development model is we need to have an export-oriented industrial policy and also alignment with other policies as well. Economic diversification is needed when 90% of the export is mineral resources. The boom and bust cycle will be hitting the Mongolian economy. Sustainable and inclusive economic development is needed. About 1/3 of the population are still herders. About half the population is living in the capital city. About 1/3 of the population is under the age of 18. 2/3 of the population is under the age of 35. Very young population, actually, when many other Asian countries are facing problems of becoming gray before they turn rich. We actually have the opposite problem of supporting the young population for the next generation. We have the unequal wealth distribution problem that needs to be addressed. Financing governance of financial sector and it needs to be improved. Education system and productivity needs to be improved. Productivity pretty much goes up and down along with the GDP growth as well. So this needs to be improved. Civil service capacity and also stability is an important factor. In the last few years, we have adopted a number of laws to tackle these issues. But at the same time, one of the most important things is, especially now with about over 40 laws that need to be amended, along with the constitutional amendment, we need to adopt our own economic development model, which all the other policies need to be aligned with. Next one, please. Yep. So that would be all. Thank you so much.